Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Welcome to today's Skill Up session from DevOps Institute and PeopleCert, powered by Techstrong. I am your host, Sharon Florentine. Today, we are talking about open source toolchain orchestration. Before we get started, though, I need to let the audience know that this program is live and is being recorded. You can view it again on demand whenever you'd like. Also, please note there is a chat box on the right side of your screen that will allow you to communicate with the rest of the audience. And you can also send in questions to the panelists using the Q&A tab on that side column there. So please question us, send us questions. We love to hear from you. Send them early, often, keep them coming. So that said, I'm going to start with some introductions here. Our panel today has Pavel Pivash. I think I got that right.
Yes.
He's smiling, so I must have done okay. Developer advocate with Spacelift. Manuel Schuler, a DevOpsologist with Wipro. It looks like I got that one pretty okay too. Yeah. And Arsalan Naeem, a field engineer for Kubernetes, Telco, and Edge at SUSE. Yeah? All right.
You can truncate if you want. It's all right.
Okay,
It's just
cool.
like
I'm 3 for 3 though, folks. This is going to be a good one. All right. So I'm going to start off with a pretty basic one. Why do you need orchestration in your DevOps tool chains, first of all? Arsalan, you want to?
Anybody want to start?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can kick it off. Yeah, I'll kick it off.
All right.
Yeah, so when you say orchestration, to me that is how do you lay out all the different tools and how you deploy them. So whether that's Trivy to Jenkins to CI, a lot of that is tools that we would use, and then orchestration is how do we deploy those tools and how do we manage those, right? Now with Jenkins, you've had shared pipelines, libraries that we can consume. We're moving away from those because they've become a little bloated, just because they're a little too complex for teams, especially as DevOps grows. We're getting more and more talent in, and we have a lot of these legacy systems that I've seen relying on these shared pipelines, these old Java models. And when it comes to developing really quickly, sometimes we need to change a pipeline. And then a lot of these models were built around having really big teams. So this means we have some common pipelines. Our repository will reference this pipeline and run it. Say like build a Docker image, right? But these standard templates, the way that they're done with, for example, Jenkins, is that you have all these Groovy classes. But now we're moving into the world of GitLab CI, GitHub Actions. We're moving to Drone. A lot of these we're moving away from that. So, having a consistent strategy of how we're going to manage our pipelines and how we're going to manage the tools that are deployed with it. So what does this mean is like having a standardized way. So if you have, for example, 10 applications, it's really easy to manage 10 pipelines individually. But now you scale that up to 1,000 pipelines for 10,000, microservices. It's really hard. So that's why you need to have an effective strategy around how do you build these pipelines and how do you maintain those tools. And a lot of this is, you want to automate the pipelines themselves, but also, the day two operations, which would be to run those pipelines.
Gotcha. Pavel, Manuel, anything you want to add to that or elaborate on?
Yeah. to add, at least. This is absolutely spot on. But I see another aspect of the subject of toolchain orchestration. That aspect is you have a lot of tools. Okay, we are talking about the SDLC. We are talking about bringing an application from an idea into something that runs into production. You have a lot of tools, and these tools embed a lot of information. You bring a lot of information in these tools. And the orchestration and the term orchestration comes from the music. And music is bringing all these instruments together, that each of them produce some sounds, and at the end of the day, the good orchestrator will make these sounds bright together. Okay, and this is what I try to focus on when I talk about orchestration. Is you have, so we could take the same names roughly. You have Jenkins, you have some analysis tools, you have an artifact repo, you have a lot of things that where you put information in your SDLC, and orchestrating that is one of the aspects of orchestrating is retrieve the information from step to step, know which information is managed by which tool, and at the end of the day, be able to link all this information, whatever the tool has produced the information, to orchestrate the music, to orchestrate what the tools have produced, to be able to in production, because this is what I have in mind, the production, in production, be able to identify anything. Okay, so this is the aim, the goal, the target.
Agree with both of you, and what you said, Manuel, is resonating for me really, because I had like a analogy here. So, and I will risk this. So, do you prefer to have a team or bunch of engineers? No? The same is here. Do you prefer to have bunch of tools which are not connected in any way, or orchestrated toolchain, orchestrated pipeline, let's say, but not like a Jenkins pipeline, but tools pipeline, where you understand, you pass information, as you said, Manuel, from one point to second point, you understand this information. There is like a kind of contract between those tools. And then you have like, on top, you have some management tool. It can be Jira, it can be whatever, right? We love Jira. You have to have the full control, because what you, Arslan, said is very important. When scale come, this is the moment where trouble started, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. And so I think, so there's a couple questions that came into the chat as we were going through that. And I think I did not interpret your answers to mean that we couldn't have reusable pipeline components. Is that, or am I misunderstanding?
I mean, reusable components is great. You want to have reusable components, but you want to structure them in a way that you're not hindering yourself. So the reason why I gave the example of Jenkins is because it's something I worked on recently, because migration from Jenkins to something like newer like GitHub requires some different abstractions, because with the way Jenkins is built around Groovy, it's a Java model, you have modules, you have sub-libraries, and then you look at something like GitHub Actions or GitLab CI, which is very different in the sense of it's very basic. It just runs like a shell command, and then you have to trigger other pipelines. So it's more like when you start looking at the new CI systems, you would have sub pipelines rather than reusable components, right? So in reusable components, you're either pulling in like a master Terraform module and reusing that. So a lot of that is, you got to find the right strategy for you. There's a lot of, tutorials on how to get you guys going, and there's a lot of vendors that you come in and set you up, but you need to test it for day 2, right? Everything works on day 1 and everything works in dev. But as soon as you roll that out into production, and as soon as you run into real world issues, for example, this library that you're using and relying on, there's some changes in there that break shores because there's a new version, of some syntax or some program, right? It's going to break it, because that's the real world. The real world we live in is slowly, so things get antiquated really quickly, right? So there's some new tool always around, and there's a new methodology, but you got to make sure what you're using is the right choice for you, and not everything works for everybody, right? There is some stuff like, building something, deploying it, and using GitOps, all these fancy stuff. That's what I live in. But sometimes you may not even need that, right? If So things like I work in Kubernetes and I can see Kubernetes being squeezed into everything. That doesn't mean it needs to be. So choose the right tool for the right job and the right components.
Exactly. This is very, very important point, because this is not about the against the reusability of things. I would go even deeper with that. Tools, modules, etc., is one part of this coin. The second side of this coin is the process, right? We want to unify, we want to reuse the processes, because again, if you have one team and one pipeline, forget about process. But no, don't do that. But if you have like thousands of pipelines,
Yeah.
well, I think I don't need to go deeper, right? And to avoid the situation that you have difference on devs and prod, you can just use only prod, right? And do not have any dev at don't do that as well. So, yeah.
But as you said, you can have 1,000 pipelines. A lot of times when you look at these big companies or you look at like segregated workloads, what happens is there might be 1,000 pipelines, but you're going to have like 15 teams managing this. So that means if you don't have a concise guideline or a layout of how your pipeline should be working, you're going to have different implementations, right? What does that cause? That causes technical debt because now you have to maintain multiple implementations of pulling Git or building an image, right? One person's using Docker, one person's using Kanika, right? It's one of those things is that you need to have consistency, and that's where the tool chain comes in because we have such complex tool chains because we work in such these agile manner where we drop in a SRE and a DevOps into a team of developers. They're going to have their own experiences, but we need to uniform that tool chain so everybody's using the same tools. And there's a lot of stuff that with legacy companies compared to new startups, that startups move quickly, but those companies that move quickly, they have a lot of technical debt. They have a lot of money to burn in the future because they're just trying to be viable. Whereas larger companies have gone through it and they need a sustainable way of growth.
Well, so are we really just talking about platform engineering then, where we're standardizing on a set of tools, a set of products that are centralized and that keeps those guardrails in place?
Yeah, platform engineering is. Go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, and then we'll get to the other questions that are in the chat. Sorry.
Yeah. So I would say platform engineering is, you're building a platform to consume, right? I see that a little bit different to where you have the tool chains for DevOps and CI/CD, right? So to me, DevOps is SRE, platform engineering is all the same word, right? You're trying to, and they have specialized, units once they get into the nitty gritty, but they're all working with the same tools, right? Mm-hmm. It's how you implement those tools from there.
There is something that just popped up in the chat, which is quite interesting. I can't restrict the addition of new DevOps tools. Okay, and this is something this is the real life. Okay, a lot of organizations, for a lot of organizations, it's difficult to restrict the adoption of new tools. They have to go through a process for that, but at the end of the day, you often come with new tools. So I would say, and I just put it there, but the tool is not that important. As you said, Pavel, the process is important. The tool is just here to implement the process. So when I say I want to build a pipeline, it's a little bit different. I want to build a process. I want to define a process that will bring my application somewhere, still in my head in production. And I have a bunch of tools. Obviously, the pipeline is what comes to my mind immediately because I've been using Jenkins or other tools that are automating these transitions, the stages, the transitions, and so on. But my way of thinking would be more on the process rather than on the pipeline. If I have to define this in another way, for example, with some events that will gather at a certain moment to make a decision. So to take an example, I am in development, so I have, before moving to the next step or stage or environment, which can be QA, SIT, whatever, you name it. But I want to have the CI that has gone through. I want to have some analysis, probably the static analysis, some security analysis in the code. And when I got everything from different tools, from different repositories, then I'm allowed to move forward. This is orchestration. So it looks like the definition of a pipeline, the beginning of the definition of a pipeline, but it's more about the process. Okay, you don't necessarily have to do it with a pipeline. Today, most of the tools are manipulating that concept. This is where it becomes a little bit difficult. But if tomorrow something slightly different comes with a different name than pipelines, I'm very happy to do that. For me, the process is important. What do I need to have at the end? What stamps do I need for the security? What stamps do I need for the performance, in order to bring my application from steps to steps, environments to environments, okay, stages to stages in the pipeline.
Yeah, that's true. And well, let me tell you this way. If it's not about not bringing new tool to the chain, because in DevOps, in many talks which I've done, I said I'm DevOps. I'm doing simple things in very complicated way, right? So there is a tendency, right? That's why we have so many buzzwords. Kubernetes, I'm sorry, Aslan, but this is one of the buzzwords. DevOps itself is a buzzword. Serverless, containerization, etc., etc., etc. We use this because everyone is using it, and everyone is using it because everyone is using it. We don't think why. And this is the first question. If you come to me, I'm sorry, I see only participant 117, so I don't know your name. But if you come to me and you say, I want to use this tool in my chain, I will ask a very simple question in the beginning. Why?
Yeah, that's the simplest way is, what problem is the tool solving? At the end of the day, you have to really ask, what problem is the tool solving? And also, what problems is it creating? You said it right. Kubernetes is too complex to run your spa, right? You don't need the Kubernetes just to run your 3-tier application of API, right? Unless you have multi-tenancy, right? So it's one of those things is you've got to look at the tool, and the advantages might be great, like it works awesome, but what are the cons, right? Complexity, long-term management, fast upgrade cycles, and these are things you need to consider before you adopt any tool, in my opinion, because that's what's going to cause most of the troubles. Is you adopt something because it looks cool, it's you think it's great, but then once you actually use it and you drop it into production, like a lot of small agile teams do, because it works. That's where they run into issues of maintainability, because you need to be able to maintain that process long term and evolve it as the team grows.
And the question was also about the features for better process. I would not say the features, right? The process is for, let's say, achieving something in controllable way, right? So you have your metrics for the process. You have your expectations from the process, right? And you run this process, let's say, against your metrics. Right? So it's not about the features. It's more like about achieving the measurements you want to have, right?
Also, I would add to that is, when you say metrics, sometimes, we've all come across it. There's going to be a flaky CI test. That breaks the process. So if you were encountering, if you're a dev and you're pushing stuff and the CI is going to fail sometimes, right? And you just ignore it. That one time it might fail for a legit reason. So that is why your process needs to be reliable, in the sense that when you have CI tests, reliability is key. make sure that everything is reliable and that there's no, and you're trying to test for those edge cases. And that's where you use those metrics. You look at the build times, you see what's going on, how many passes of stages, and how is the progression, right? What was the so as a team, you need to review the DevOps processes just like how we review our architecture, right? So we need to see if we did a pull, a build, and a push and deployment, how successful were we these deployments in the last 6 months, right? Can we improve somewhere? And why did our build times go from 5 minutes to 20 minutes? Because as you're working, you won't notice this regularly unless we have alerts. So, it could be that, caching it or you slowed down or, the agents are getting bogged down, right? So process is everything, and also the review of those processes as well.
Yes, testing the tests is a very important element, right? So for example, we have unit tests or the approach to test unit tests. If you provide something what should, fail the test and the test still is green, it means that you have wrong test, right? And it's easy to write tests in that way that you have them always green. So that is very important, and we have a very nice comment from in the chat about selection of the tools. Of course, on the end of the discussion, there are always tools, but let's imagine the situation that we have like in our market where we can hire people, right? We have one person who knows Pulumi and 100 people who knows Terraform. Will this have impact on our process? It will.
Yeah. So rewinding a little bit, we were talking about costs and, long-term costs. And I think just in general, a lot of organizations seem to start with, because we're talking about open source toolchain orchestration here, a lot of people seem to go into it thinking, well, it's open source, it's free, so I'm automatically going to start with my costs, right? So then now all of a sudden we have these tools, these pipelines that are made up of all these open source tools that are free. And then everyone seems surprised when the costs when there are costs down the line for, free. And this has been a debate for the entire, history of open source of development. But I mean, what other advantages are there for using open source in your tool chain versus a proprietary tool or a closed source tool?
There is one that I don't hear very often. It's easy to notarize. Because when you're building, I mean, as you may know, the software bill of material is a topic that is coming back, very, very pushy. And if you want to do things seriously, you have to notarize. Okay, and an open source tool is easy to notarize. So this is something that comes as a pro for the open source recently. That was not mentioned very often 5 years ago, for example. That said, as you said, Sharon, we don't want here to to fuel the debate between open source or closed source. So especially, I mean, if I take my own example, I've been working for a lot of companies doing closed source, so vendors, and for big rollouts, big implementations, the debate is very, very. There's a lot of passion on that debate. Okay.
Yes, it is. It definitely is. I'm involved in one anyway. So the thing with OpenTF, which is a new emerging initiative, right? There are always good sides and bad sides of open source, closed source. Not that all closed source, but not necessarily open source, right? So, and this is more and more hot discussion in recent time, right? Because we see many companies which grow open source and then they change approach. Just it's their decision, right? So don't get me wrong here. But the question is about open source. That first of all, we cannot take it as a granted. So this is the first thing. So also depends, of course, how this open source is maintained. Right? If the open source is under the Linux Foundation, CNCF, etc., it's the same. But well, it has different like wave or label on it, right? Because every company who is there in the market has only one goal: to earn money. That's simple like that, right? So we need to remember this. And generally speaking, the cost of open source is kind of hidden. And here, I don't want to say even about the cost of people who need to implement this open source, people who need to maintain some platform, the platform itself. But with open source, maybe let me take it differently. If we have closed source, we have very specific roadmap, very specific plans, very specific group of people and approach to maintain, right? And we have support, like official support. This is what I mean. With open source, probably we have much more bigger support in the community, but this is the community support. So this is very ephemeral, right? So today someone will know the answer, but this guy can be on vacation for 1 month and he will not help us that time, right?
Yeah.
So there are different, and this is also kind of cost, because if we have issue, we want to solve this now.
Yeah. So, good, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, solve it now.
No. Yeah, I was gonna. Yeah, so I was just gonna touch on a couple of points. So, first of all, I was gonna say one pro and a few cons, because there's some stuff that people don't see. And I want to give real world examples. First thing, I work with SUSE, so we're a full open source company. So, for example, we've taken closed source and open sourced it, right? So there was a tool called NewVector, completely closed source. We open sourced it. So it really depends on the company. We at SUSE treat open source as true open source, true FOSS, right? What we don't sell software, we sell services, right? So we sell support, right? Professional services. How do you get up and running? How do you run it in production, right? So you got to really trust the company and look at the lineage, right? So SUSE has been around for 30 years. They've been doing open source, right? Then you have you look at the other of our competitors, which have changed their ways recently. So you really got to look at the history and how they've treated the projects, right? Are those projects still living, right? And how much do they commit back to the open source communities themselves? The two negative points I want to touch on is two real world examples. So with open source, there is some stuff like, for example, sometimes in the open source, things can happen. For example, in Rust, there's a tool called Serde, which is deserializing JSON. And then there was a Nugget package for .NET called Mock. What did the Serde package do? One day, the developer decided he's going to pre-compile the binaries, and when you compile the Rust code, it's going to ship pre-compiled binaries. People are not, if you have a DevOps person and you say, oh, they're going to ship pre-compiled binaries into your CI system, you don't know what's in that pre-compiled. Again, this is the maintainer of the actual open source project, and they have full control around that. This was reverted because of the backlash from the community. So that shows there is a pro to that, because the community is there to advocate for the right thing, right? It wasn't right on the developer to just hold hostage because of some bureaucracy between the Rust Foundation and the and the project, right? And there was another one which was this project called Mock on Nugget, and this developer decided it'd be a good idea that when you run this tool in your pipeline, that it will send you an email, because it will look at your Git email for you to sign up to pay to provide help, right, towards a project, right? Again, you didn't opt in; it just picked up your Git email and just sent you a thing because this developer thought it's a cool idea. Again, this is one of those, and they also added 1 second of extra build time to pipelines. So these are some of the cons of open source, right? Just because a project is well used, I think Nugget has over $140,000 per week right? So these are some of the things that you don't see and you see with experience. So a lot of times you really got to vet the tool, right? You really got to look at it and see what is the value, right? For example, Terraform has been great. We love Terraform for the past, was it 9 years? I think it is like total now. And, recently they changed directions. Even though it doesn't affect a lot of us right now, we've lost trust in them because tomorrow they can turn around and enforce the BSL on creating infrastructure, even though right now it doesn't. So that is where we got to be really careful in what we use and, adapt to the risks, because we know with open source there is risks, but it is just a compromise at the end of the day.
Yeah, agree. And James, you have a good point that you cannot trust every single open source project, especially for enterprises, because in enterprise we expect some level of maturity, right, and some level of process. And if you have chaotic approach when you start the open source project, this is like a common situation, right? We have heads full of ideas. We want to just do things, right? But if you have properly managed and properly secured project with proper process to implement new features, implement changes, it changed, right? The development will be slower thanks to that or because of that. But still, there are different levels, right, of it. So yeah, not every open source will be good for you. Like not every closed source is good for you.
Yeah. Indeed. There was another question I was going to ask here. This is a good point too. Participant 361 made the comment that if you're in defense, healthcare, other industries, like highly regulated industries, we call them, that may force you to go one direction or another, whether that's, specific, like the SBOM requirements or, attestation or notarization, or, you can't use that because it doesn't fit the compliance requirements. I just thought that was an interesting point.
Yeah, just to add, sometimes you'll have an open source tool, and especially like when you look at the US government, they'll have like the approved list of software that they can use. But sometimes it's just software isn't on there, like an open source software. And for example, a lot of them run it through CVEs. It's not like that software can't be used. It's all about risk mitigation. So when you look at those highly regulated industries, things will always have security vulnerabilities. It's how you manage those security vulnerabilities in the process, right? So it's taking a look at the risk and how do we completely mitigate it? How do we stop somebody even accessing this before the CVE is exploited, right? So so open source sometimes can be used in those regulated industries if you do the correct process, and I think a lot of it's called STIG. So you go through a STIG process, which means the U.S. government will look it through the software and tell you these are the vulnerabilities. You provide a document saying this is how we fix them, and then you can use those. So just because it's an open source project, it might not be the list. You can still do it. There's still steps you can take, and a lot of people don't know that.
Yes, it's again about this maturity of the project very often, right?
All right. So, I mean, we've talked a little bit about security there, but when we're talking about best practices for building a tool chain using open source software, what kind of best practices do you all have that you can share with the audience here? And like, what are the pitfalls that you need to be looking out for? I know we've touched on some of this, but like licensing stuff, we obviously just covered some vulnerability stuff, support perspectives. What would you say to someone who comes to you and says, I would like to build this tool chain? Go.
While I was disconnected, you were discussing anyway about the open source versus closed source.
Yes.
There's a little jump.
You couldn't do without. No, I was joking, but as far as security is concerned, I strongly think that there is no specific things for open source. I mean, if you bring a tool in your organization, in your company, it has to be compliant with your security policies. So it can be an open source, it can be a closed source. At the end of the day, I don't really care. I want that tool to be compliant with my security policies. So, hence the question, how do I implement my security policies? With tools. Should I choose open source tools or closed source tools? And this is a very, very open question. Very
And
honest.
then you land with SolarWinds, which
you've been faster.
sorry.
But yeah, the examples I have, okay, in my experience and in my real life are mainly on commercial products that, I mean, we don't want to do advertisement, but there is one that is very known, all the Sonotype scanning suite. A lot of companies are using that kind of tool to allow the tool to enter. Okay, and once it's there, so regular scannings, all the things that must be verified for the tool to operate in the context of this or that company. But it's really a matter of it. It's not a matter of open source or closed source from my point of view. It's really, I want to have a tool that is compliant, that I'm comfortable to use, and it's a question of risk. I mean, I think that on all the topics we ended up with, it's a matter of risk management, risk mitigation. I want to be sure that the tool I'm using is at a certain level of security. Is it also your experience, guys?
Yeah, so this is what, so like, the way I tackle this is like everything you said, but there's certain things that I recommend from the get-go, right? First of all, I mean, it makes a lot of sense in your platform, in your systems or wherever you run your pipelines or whatever, is to be completely isolated, right? Use a HTTP proxy. Don't let that CI system reach out to the internet, first of all. In my opinion, that's been the best use case. Secondly, that HTTP proxy, put a whitelist on it. Simple as, just put a whitelist URLs that you trust. So straight away that you can go to malicious sites to pull stuff down, right? And then thirdly, rebuild your tools. Just because there's a Docker image available from some guy like me from my Docker hub doesn't mean you should use my tools, right? You should go and get the source and rebuild the tools and make sure the Docker images and stuff. And I'm just talking about current context, which is like agents and stuff, where we use tools like where we build stuff like Trivy and everything else. Make sure you verify the source, like we talked about, notarization, right? Make sure you build your own images. Yes, it's easy to use other people's, but have your own process of building your own images and your own agents, so you know exactly what's going on, right? The scanning and everything will come as you're building tools, and make sure your platform that you build the CI/CD goes through some pipelines as well, right? Don't just have some type of CI/CD or something just for your source code. Have it for the pipelines themselves, right? Make it this whole integrated platform, because what you're essentially doing is eating your own dog food if you test your pipelines as well. And always try to break your stuff, right? That's the best way. Like if you're just building the system, like what's the best way I can hack this, right? That's the way I approach it, and that's how I've done it in the past. And I want to mitigate as much as I can think about it, and then let loose my team as well to see if they can break it. And that's a really easy way to just really hardening your processes.
And again, what both of you said is about the process and approach and awareness, not about the tools. because I can have the most expensive hammer in the world, right, full of gold and diamonds, but I have to glue two sticks together. So know your tool set, know your process, know your goal. That's the way. Not just select the tools because I don't know what, right?
And question management. Sorry, go ahead, Daniel. I was going to say question management. If they're trying to push down a tool and it's closed source, just because they've got some buy-in or this, I've seen this a lot. Vendors will give you a deal on a software just to sell your quote, right? Make sure you look at the software to see if it actually works and if it fits your needs, not just because it's cheap and free. That's one thing I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a question of order. Know what you want. When we were talking about the question of the participant 361 about defense, healthcare, highly regulated industries, know what you want and know what you have to comply to. Then define your process to reach there, and then after that you can choose the tools, but only after.
Yeah. And to your point, Arsalan, that sometimes the push may come from above for a certain tool that a vendor, they got a deal or whatever, and that may not even, if we're talking about orchestration and making sure that all these things work together, like you got to make sure, this is going to sound real obvious, but you got to make sure that it works with what you already have, or else that's gonna
DevOps people are very creative, and they can connect things which shouldn't be connected in any way, right? And you can do this wiring, but the question is if it's good approach, right? And what we lose in the effect.
Exactly. It's just because the piece doesn't fit, don't make it fit.
Yeah.
Now, hopefully, the time where the big vendors like IBM, CA, Oracle, or others were selling something with you put everything in the box, so it will be, we will have someone in the organization to pick it up and to buy additional licenses. This is hopefully. I don't see that practice anymore. I've not seen it for a while.
Also, one of the things that you talked about, like putting it together in a box, abstraction is the devil, right?
Yeah.
Just because something like a tool or something makes it easy doesn't mean it's right. Always double check what's actually happening under the hood and make sure you understand what the tool is doing. If you don't understand what's going on, because that's the great thing, we live in a world of abstractions, right? We create more and more abstractions, and we're sweeping the debt under the rug, for someone else to manage. But you gotta know what's going on. And the reason why I say this is because here's a real world example. And choosing the right tools, as we talked about abstractions. We had like a customer at my previous job that wanted to use Docker to build images, and then running the Docker daemon inside Jenkins and passing the socket. And I'm like, you're just building an image. You don't need the whole container Docker runtime just to build an image. There's tools like BuildKit, and also Docker needs root privileges. So like you need to just realize, just because it works doesn't mean it's the right tool. And that's what I'm trying to hammer in on. You've got to really understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Going back a little bit to Sharon, to your question about security, with big companies and big software like from IBM, Oracle, whatever, we have some level of trust and some level of information, right? But with open source, very often we don't, and we need to do the work. I always say universe doesn't like the emptiness, right? You do not pay, but you pay in different way. So you need to do the checks. And to give you the analogy, if you build your Node.js project, how sure you are how the maintenance of all of these 10,000 dependencies downloaded during the process of preparing the application is done. Are you sure there is nothing like there is some one guy who is maintaining the main crucial library? And what will happen if he will have like mental problems?
Or just to add to that, sometimes dependencies, just because it's a package, doesn't mean it's the right thing. For example, you said node, left pad is even, is odd. Write the code. Don't just use a dependency for that or a package, right? Don't just because there is something that makes your life easy doesn't mean it's right. That's I've seen, because think about it. If you use something like is even, right? It's a great thing. What if there's somebody that injects malicious code? It's happened before, right? We will have a Bitcoin miner if you keep, relying on packages, right? So it's all those things.
And participant 724 has quite good point here. So it's nothing new that we need to know what is behind, right? But we as humans, we are lazy. We like to search for shortcuts and use them. That's why we need to remind ourselves and our teams and our companies all the time about this.
Well said. All right. I think we are just about ready to wrap up here. Thank you to all of the audience for joining us today, and a huge thank you to Pavel, Arslan, Manuel. You guys are awesome. It was so much fun hanging out with you today and being able to have this conversation. Folks, just a reminder that the session has been recorded, so you can go back and watch it whenever you like, or share it with friends, colleagues, coworkers, or your enemies. We don't mind. Just share it. We are also going to ask for just another couple seconds of your time, if you don't mind. We're going to have a survey, a webinar survey popping up on your screen. If you would just take a couple minutes to fill that out for us. Let us know what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, what you would like to see more of from us. We would really, really appreciate it. Next up in the SKILup session program is best practices for open source software tool integration. That will be happening on Tuesday, September 12th. And the registration page for that session is pinned for you in the chat. Hope to see you there next week. Thank you all again for joining us. We had so much fun. Have a great day.
And remember, open source is good.
It is.
He said it.